Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Inside the Mirror podcast. I'm your host, Kyle David. If you didn't know, now you know. Back with my friend, Josh Hitchcock. I know every time I'm like, hey, I'm back with a super special guest, and that's because every guest is a super special guest. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be here. Josh Hitchcock is here today. My friend, thanks for being here.
Man, Kyle, it's great to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
100%. So we were getting into it right before this, so I had to just hit record, and so we're already fired up. So I'm excited for this. So I'm like I told you, I'm gonna pass the ball to you. Give us the quick rundown before we get into the nitty gritty of like who you are, where you came from, whatever you want to share. Kind of just like your origin story.
Absolutely. Well, my origin story, I guess, would be made in New Orleans, right? So,
oh, come on.
If your audience detects an accent or they need a translator, I'm sorry. I say it in advance. I'm sorry, but I am from New Orleans, Louisiana. I grew up there. Lived in Mississippi for a little while as well. Graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi. Southern Miss to the top for any of my Golden Eagles alumni out there, and got a degree in communications and. Really just have had a varied work experience, in history through the years with my career. And I'll just talk about what I've kind of done the last few years. In 2019, I worked with Christian Brothers Automotive in Houston, which actually led me out of New Orleans over to Texas. And, if it wasn't for the family I have out here in Houston, I don't know what I would have done because, leaving Louisiana after, all I've known is Louisiana, Mississippi, that's a pretty big deal, but everything's better in Texas. I'm not going to say that's the truth, but I'll say that I understand where that comment comes from, right? But so moved out here and worked with Christian Brothers Automotive for 3 years. Started off in their development and training team, teaching their sales classes, customer service classes to team members, and then kind of transitioned, still retained those responsibilities, but transitioned basically the last year and a half, 2 years, where my focus really became hyper-focused on leadership development within the company. So I had the honor of actually writing and designing their curriculum that they still use and created a company podcast, so it was a really exciting time to see the impact that leadership makes on people, right? And that's one reason I'm just excited to be here, because I know we're going to talk about that. So did that, became a John Maxwell team member as well during that time, which really added kind of to my quiver in terms of knowledge and so forth with leadership. And then last year, I transitioned to a company called Unleash Brands, and we're a company that's in the franchising world as well. And our focus is the children enrichment industry. So we've got 6 different brands that touch the lives of kids in very different ways. And so our goal, our founder will say is, man, to own the kids market. And that's what we want to do because we believe this next generation coming up, right? If you ever have a problem, I'll pause it here for a moment. If you ever have a problem with the current generation and you wonder what's wrong with that generation, all you got to do is look at the generation behind them and you find your answer, right? So we're determined to really touch this next generation. So I'm enjoying every minute of it and the impact it's having in people's lives. And yeah, and on the fun side, I am a New Orleans Saints and LSU fan. So probably the hardest adjustment coming to Texas has been the amount of Cowboys fans out here. But besides that, it's great to be with you. That's a little bit about me.
Let's go. I love it. Well, first of all, is it New Orleans or Nolans? How do you say it?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. Okay. I'll never get it right.
Yeah.
You're a native. Sweet. I love that, man. I love what you said about, right, the next generation, because it's so true, right? Like we like to point the fingers at the young kids and, these young whippersnappers, but it's like, who raised them? Who's the people that impacted them, right? Like, where did they get that from? All the negative things we say. I love that. So for you, like, let's just get into it, right? Like leadership is something that you and I share a passion for. And we believe, right, that I've said this recently. I'm curious your thoughts. I've said this a lot recently. I think 99% of the world's problems, because you don't want to ever say 100 because, sometimes there's a 1%er, but like 99% of the world's problems are a leadership problem, right? Like
Absolutely.
Whether it's family, education, politics, wars, right? Famine. I mean, you name it, if you follow the trail long enough, you'll find it runs into a leadership problem. That's my opinion. What are your thoughts?
100%. You know, I like John Maxwell says something, you know, it's really neat about that. He says everything rises and falls on leadership, everything.
100%.
And I totally agree with that. When you go to the root of a problem, it can be boiled down to a leadership problem. So we'll take a hypothetical example. I get into it at work with a team member, right? Thankfully, I don't have that problem. I'll work with great people just in case they're listening, you know.
Shout out to them.
Right. Shout out to them. But no, seriously, let's say you get into it with somebody at work, right? You don't get along, you begin to butt heads and it gets out of hand, right? You start saying stuff, they start saying stuff. Next thing you know, both of you guys are fired because y'all just went at it and so forth. If you trace that back, I can trace that back to a leadership problem. And here's how. So you've got two people that don't know conflict resolution. So apparently they haven't been taught conflict resolution, right? By whoever is leading them, right? And there was a culture, right, that was allowed to be born and to have that facilitated that type of conflict that should have never occurred to begin with, right? Because if you are facilitating the right environment, then healthy conflict resolution is going to happen, because then all of a sudden you're going to approach somebody as a friend and not as an enemy, right? So something as simple as that can be traced back to a leadership problem, right? And I think if you look at the world right now, we are hungry, and I say we collectively, we're part of the world, right? So we are hungry for leaders. We're hungry for people who that don't just say they're leaders, that can get out there and do the work, serve the people, and lead them well. Because I mean, everybody, you know, wants a better tomorrow. Everybody says, "Hey, do you want a better tomorrow?" Absolutely, I do. But my question is, okay, what are we doing right here, right now, in our part to make a better tomorrow, right? Because if it's all on one person, if it's all collectively on one individual to lead the charge and set the direction, et cetera, it's never going to happen, right? But if we can collectively come together and really begin to serve other people and really rein in our own leadership through personal development and so forth, I believe we're going to see the impact of that. When I was at Christian Brothers, I know I'm rambling now, Kyle. So
that's what we do.
But when I was at Christian Brothers, it was fantastic to see the impact that leadership development program made on corporate staff, made on employees in the field, made on franchisees, et cetera. I can't tell you like how many times, you know, I would be pulled aside. I'd get a note, I'd get an email, I'd get a text. Hey, you don't know how much this impacted my life. And here's the cool thing. This program obviously was designed in large part to develop leaders within the company. Obviously, the company has a purpose to exist, right? And they want to retain employees and develop leaders. But I can't tell you how many times I got a phone call or text saying, hey, my finances were in the shambles and now they're not. Hey, my marriage was in the rocks and now it's not. And I'm thinking to myself, when did I talk about marriage? When did I talk about finances? I never did. But these leadership principles impacted them in such a way that now their entire life was changed. So yeah, there's power in leadership.
That's huge. What you just said, right? Like leadership principles spill over to every area of your life, right? It's not just a work thing. It's not just a corporate thing. It's a leadership is right. It's something that spills into every facet of life, right? How do you lead yourself? How do you lead the people around you? How do you lead in your finances? How do you lead in your marriage? It's all intertwined, right? Like how you show up to work is how you're going to show up to all kinds of other things. Where did this is my curiosity, true curiosity. Since we've talked a few times, I don't think I've asked you this. Where did the leadership itch or the passion, like, how'd you get it, right? Like, were you just born like this, or did you catch the bug along the way? What happened?
So yeah, I was born like this. It was a gift. No, I'm just joking. No. It was not a gift, you know. But no. So basically, where the seeds of this first started. So I'll back up a second. My dad had a heart attack while I was on the phone with him in college. I know it's a pretty random, like kind of sad story, but it'll play into this in a second. And he ended up passing away 2 years later. Won't go into all the details, but long story short, never recovered from that heart attack. And so when I look back at my life at the time, you know, here I am, I'm in college, I'm working 60 hours a week. My mom is not, you know, she's not checked in, and my dad is obviously deceased. So at this moment, you know, it was a time for me to really come to my identity as to who do I want to be? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do with my life? And for me, it started with looking at how I was raised, right? From not a cynical lens, but also not with rose-colored glasses either. right? So I looked at it very soberly, and I said, okay, here are some things my parents did really well that I'm going to continue to embrace in my life and imitate. And here's some things that I'm not doing that, right? I'm not going to talk like that. I'm not going to address like that. I'm not going to do those things. So that was the first thing. It was the first thing that kind of sparked that, and my commitment. It birthed a commitment to personal development, of always getting better, always looking to understand, always looking to grow. And then fast forward, so now we're in 2018. So that was 16, and then 18. I was going to a church in Mandeville, Louisiana, called Church of the King. Great church, Pastor Steve Robinson, great man of God. And they had a leadership, small group program, whatever you want to call it, at Church of the King. And I was going through that leadership program. And this is, where I learned about life planning. This is where I read my first John Maxwell book, Intentional Living. This is where like all of these things begin to happen. And I'm learning about servant leadership, and I'm learning about all these concepts. And then it's like, wait a minute. So now I've got tangible, quantifiable, like just books galore, thought leaders galore, that I can just start, reading like crazy and listening to podcasts like crazy, and it's going to enhance my life. So the desire, right? It all started with a desire to get better. And that was in college, right? Now this burn and this itch, so to speak, didn't come to full force, full manifestation, whatever, till 2018, when I began to really dive into these books, hear these speakers, etc. And then it really started rocking my world, because now it's no longer just a desire where it's like, I want to get better, but how do I do it? Now it's like, man, if I just listen to these people that I respect, etc., and start applying these principles to my life, all of a sudden now I'm going to see results. And then when I did see results in my life on a very quick basis, that birthed a passion out of me to just share that with other people.
Oh, I love it. It's said a lot, right? Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just go find the people that are where you want to be or doing what you want to do, and go learn from them, and then replicate the good habits or the things that they've done to get there, right? Like, we overthink it a lot. But I'm curious, like, can you break down, like, what was the like personal development journey like, right? Like, you're like, okay, cool. What are the things you did and the things that you saw from that?
Yeah, it's great. That's a great question. And I want to, before I answer that question, I do want to pause on a comment you made just a minute ago about, looking at people as to where they are and where you're wanting to go. I mean, it's so true, Kyle, right? I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. I've got people in my life that I look to, and maybe one of them is in a place financially I want to be, right? But maybe there's another one that's in a place spiritually I want to be. It's not all encompassed in one person, right? But there are people that influence, and what I've realized is, I mean, you can only go as far as you'll allow yourself to go, and with the people that you surround yourself with. So I'm constantly looking at people as to, I want to be like you, right? You do this better than me. Okay, how can I learn to do it just as good as you, right? Or hopefully just close to where you're at, right? So that's, I love that comment. But going back to your question, so what did I do to personally develop myself? So it started as simple as just reading books and podcasts. That's as simple as it started, right? And so I then began to take those principles and applying them practically. So serving other people, putting other people first, right? Not putting yourself ahead of everybody else, right? Being okay taking the backseat, right? So I have a type A personality, high D personality. And so it can be difficult, right, to let somebody else have the wheel, because man, God has gifted me and equipped me to drive, right? That's the personality He's given me. I should have the wheel right now, right? But just because you're called to do something doesn't mean you're ready for that seat. Right. You might have a calling, right, and a gifting that's going to take you somewhere, but you might not be ready for the seat you're trying to take just yet. Doesn't mean the seat's not for you. Just means it might not be the season now. So I say all that to say, started reading books, started doing podcasts, started attending conferences. I was living, breathing, eating leadership stuff and really applying it. So if I read a book on life planning, I didn't just read the book. I went and got the life plan template and make the life plan, right? If I read a book about look for something practical every day to impact the lives of other people, I started looking for ways every day to impact the lives of other people, right? So The biggest thing for me, practically speaking, was, man, if I read it, I treated it almost like marching orders, right? Like
Mhm.
if it said do this, I'm going to do this. It may not make sense to me. It may not, I may not fully grasp, like, man, what's the purpose of this, et cetera. When I first did the life plan, it took me like, 6 hours to do it. And I didn't understand it, right? I mean, I was like, man, first 2 or 3 hours of that thing, I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I designing this? Well, I finally got through it and I still didn't understand it, right?
Mhm.
Fast forward to the end of that year, right? That was in January. Fast forward to the end of that year, and I look back at that life plan, and then I said, I get it now, right?
Mhm.
I get it
Mhm.
now. So I think sometimes we're so caught up in instant gratification or instant success or instant results when it's going to take time. So,
Mhm.
for me, that's what I did to personally, like, if I read it, if I heard it, if somebody shared it with me and I viewed them as somebody I aspired to be, then I
Mhm.
took it like the Bible, so to speak, and just applied it.
Mhm. Yeah, you said two things that I think is huge. And that last thing you were kind of referencing, right? It's inputs over outcomes. We talk about that all the time at Leader with my team and just in life, right? Like you have to put in the inputs and not focus on the outcomes, right? Like you're saying, like you have to do the things to see the results, and you don't see the results right away. But you
Right.
have to do the inputs. You have to continue to put in the inputs, right? It's just like an athlete, right? They have to continue to show up to practice and hone their craft and sharpen their skills to then be able to go play in the big game and get the contract and do the things that they want. It's inputs that lead to outcomes. But I think you mentioned it, right? We live in a culture that's just seeking outcomes and not always willing to do the inputs. I think
Yeah.
that's huge.
Oh man, I mean, I'll tell you this: if your goal as a leader, right? Anybody listen to this, I would say this: if your goal to be a leader is for the notoriety, for the fame, for the position, for the money that goes with it, you're doing it for the wrong reason, right?
Yep.
It's not about, like you said, it's all about results, but it's not about results, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's all about results in a sense of, yes, if I'm not going to do the same thing over and over again to get the same results. That's the definition of insanity, right?
100%.
If I want to, increase and get better results, I'm going to change my habits. But at the end of the day, the results I'm seeking don't necessarily, or not synonymous, I should say, with recognition.
Mhm.
Recognition comes with results, but you shouldn't seek results because of recognition.
That's solid. You shouldn't seek results for because of recognition. That's huge. There's this guy that I've asked to mentor me, and we've met multiple times recently, and he said something that I can't get rid of. So I'm curious your thoughts. He used to be a VP at Coca-Cola, so he had a really successful career, but he's a believer. And I'm just like, yeah, I got all this ambition. I'm doing all these things. I want the outcomes. I want the things. My heart is torn at times, right? Because I do want money, success, recognition, and the things, but I also I want to do it in a way that honors the Lord and
Yep.
honors people, right? So there's this. It's literally just the flesh and the spirit, that tension, right? Of what I want versus what God wants for me. But he said this. I'm curious your thoughts. He said, Kyle, the way to get all the things that you're describing, the desires that you have, is to actually deprioritize all your own ambitions.
Yep. Yeah. That's man, you could do a whole podcast just on that.
Yep.
I think, I mean, that's literally sounds like the Zig Ziglar quote.
Mhm.
You help other people achieve their goals and dreams, and they're all of a sudden they're going to help you achieve your goals and dreams, right?
Mhm. Right.
And so, yeah, 100%, deprioritizing all that. So, scripture talks about, I know we're both people of faith, so I want
Mhm.
to talk about this for a moment. It talks
Please.
about seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you. All of what things? I believe that's talking about all of the desires of your heart, because at the end of the day, the desires in your heart, right? The Bible says, how do you filter that? Whatever is pure, noble, of good report, etc. It has a whole list of things. If the desire meets that criteria, you can then say, this desire was in my heart from God, right? For
Mhm.
example, I'll take the money issue, right? I know
Mhm.
that's a tough issue. I know that's
Oh, let's go there.
yeah, let's go there. I mean, antennas go up when you say that. I
God
personally,
and money.
yeah, that's it. That's it. I personally, similar to you, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe that God does want to bless his people financially. There's no question about it. I believe that. Why do I believe that? Is it just to have nice things? No, I don't think he minds us having nice things, but I think it's so we can, number one, help spread the gospel around the world, because you can't build that water well in Africa. You can't build that church without finances. And then second to that, I believe it's to be a blessing to other people, right? I mean, some of the greatest joys I've had, and I mean, I'll just share, I'm almost uncomfortable sharing this, but I'll just share it because I just feel led to share it really. Some of the greatest joys I've had is going to a restaurant and handing the waiter or waitress $100 bill and telling them Jesus loves you, right? And then they start breaking down at the table because that's just what they needed that day, right? You can't do that without money. So I say that to say, I believe God, wants his people to be blessed, but I believe it has to come from the right heart. So I believe when we deprioritize, hey, I'm chasing this, I'm chasing achievement, I'm chasing recognition, I'm chasing the medal, I'm chasing money, and we just begin to run our race and do what God's called us to do, things come into perspective, right? And I think it also has to do with, man, resting and knowing that the favor of God is on your life. If your heart's in the right place, the favor of God's on your life, and you can't quantify that, right? You can't quantify the favor of God. When you go look at the story of Daniel, right? The Bible talks about how he was famous and distinguished, right? Now, a couple of chapters before that, it said Daniel carried a spirit of excellence on him. So if you notice that for a moment, you unpack it, okay, this man carried a spirit of excellence. He was a very disciplined leader. And then all of a sudden he became famous and distinguished. He wasn't seeking out being famous and distinguished, but the favor of God took him there. And I think that, one kind of formula that I was taught that really has influenced my life is kind of like, how do you achieve supernatural results in your career, wherever you go? How do you look at the favor of God? And this helped me kind of wrap my mind around it. And it's work multiplied by time to the infinite power, right? And he said, work multiplied by time. So it's going to take work. It's going to take time. And why the infinite power? Well, you can't quantify the favor of God. So when you take work, you take time, you pair that with the right attitude, all of a sudden God can show you his favor and you're going to achieve supernatural results. You got me fired up, Kyle.
Talk about that. Yeah, man, that's huge, right? And like to even stay there for a minute, right? Like, the money thing in the Christian faith in America is super weird, right? I don't think we've done a good job. Again, like you said, we have to look at how are we equipping people, and what are we focusing on? But this mentality of just like humble sacrifice and I can't have anything because God doesn't want me to have anything. Well, that limits your impact.
100%.
Right? It's like you said, it's a heart issue. It's not a money issue. Right. It's not a resource problem of too much resources. The problem, it's the hard issue of, can you steward it well? Right. My father and I have talked about this a lot. My dad's like my greatest, I'm his biggest fan. He's my biggest fan. He's my mentor. He's my hero. But he's he's kind of like the man that I've modeled my life after in a way, as far as faith and that and whatnot. But he's always said it's a heart posture, right? Like you said, like God just needs you to have the right heart posture and right intent, so that he can bless you, so you can steward that well and be a blessing to others, right? Because if we limit ourselves, it's like we try to limit God by being like, well, I don't need to have all this money because it will corrupt me. Well, that's you not trusting, right, that God's going to give you the right thing at the right time. And that's also you not being willing to say, hey, let me have the right heart so I can have the things and do the right thing and steward them well, right?
Yep. That's exactly right. And here's what I like about money. I almost said what I love, because I say love and people really get out of the box. Here's what I like about money. It has an exposing quality to it, right? Money does not make you a bad person. Having money does not change you. People say, well, money changed people. No, money doesn't change people. Money exposes the latent characteristics of the heart that were already there, right? I'll use an example. Truett Cathy was not wealthy when he started Chick-fil-A.
Right.
He died a billionaire with a B. Hobby Lobby founded the Greens. Did not start Hobby Lobby when they were wealthy, right? They're billionaires. Actually, one of the brothers gave it all away, wrote a book about it, giving it all away to get it all back.
Really?
Right. So you look at the Hershey family, another faith company, right? Did not start the Hershey company, wealthy. So if you look at all this stuff and these companies and these examples, right, they did have the rags to riches story, for lack of better words.
Mm-hmm.
They died great people. Why? Because money didn't change them. It just exposed what was already in their heart. And they had generosity at the forefront of who they are. So when people say, you know, hey, this person got money and it changed, I kind of, go against that and say, no, I believe money exposed what was already latent in their heart.
I'd agree with that totally. And I think this is just my own take, right? I just believe that we're at a time in the world where we need more believers and people that are not about the money, but that will steward it well. We need more Christian people and more people of faith that are on mission and are trying to make an impact. We need more money in the hands of those folks, not less.
Absolutely, man. Kyle, even in the scripture, it talks about the wealth of the wicked or the unbeliever, right? That's a strong word. That's King James language. Don't blame me. But the wealth of the wealth of the unbeliever is stored up for the righteous, right? You look at the story of Solomon. Hey, Solomon, you can have anything you want. God told Solomon that. Solomon said, give me wisdom. God not only gave him wisdom, he gave him an exorbitant amount of wealth that even kings and queens of other areas, other countries at the time would come to Jerusalem just to see the type of wealth that he had, right? It was so much, I think scripture said he was throwing away the silver because he had so much. I'd love to get to that point where it's like, man, I'm throwing away the silver, right? I don't need that, but yeah, man, I believe that God wants to equip believers. I believe he wants to bless believers in a way that they can make an impact. And I just want to say this, like if somebody out there that's listening, right, maybe they're a believer and they're in a tough financial spot, my encouragement to them would be, put sound financial practices into place, obviously be a good steward like you're talking about, but keep having the right attitude and putting God first place. And before you know it, you're going to look up and you're going to be like, oh my goodness, right? I remember like it was yesterday when I was in college. I'll never forget this. I never thought I'd be sharing the story, but I look back on it now and it's kind of funny now. It was in 2014. So this was right after my dad had the heart attack. I'm on my own financially. It was the first time I'd ever overdrawn my bank account. And I didn't know you could do that, right? I didn't know that the bank would still approve charges, even though you didn't have the money or anything like that. And so this was on a Friday. I didn't get paid till a Tuesday. And I think I'm going into the weekend, man, I'm not going to be able to, like, it's going to be peanut butter and jelly for the next couple of days. I can't leave my apartment. Like, I'm just going to stay there. And I'll never forget, I was making purchases and they were still processed. They were still approving. I'm like, what is this? Right. And so I still remember those days. It's funny now, but I was like, it just blew my mind that the bank would actually do that. Right. But I look back at that. And I still remember those days where I didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, right? And it was tough. I was working 60 hours a week. And then now fast forward to where I am now and things are great. And I would encourage people, man, keep God first place, put into practice good leadership principles, put into practice good financial principles. And before you know it, you'll look up and you'll be like, oh gosh, man, this only happened because of the favor of God.
Preach. I think I've seen it happen in so many people's lives. It's proven. I also think this, I'm curious your thoughts. I think we talk about, there's the spectrum, right? There's instant gratification and there's, the other end, which is, you just grind your face off for 2 decades and maybe it'll happen. And I just think we haven't done a good job of realizing like most of it's really more in the middle, right? Like you said, it wasn't that long ago that you didn't have much, right? Yep. It wasn't 25 years ago, right? It was a few years back. So I think we underestimate maybe how long it's going to take, right? Yep. We want it so fast, but then we go to we swing the opposite way and think, I can't get it fast. I don't want to get rich quick, and none of these get rich quick things work, so it's going to take forever. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think like what you said, that's what I'm trying to articulate, is what you said is so good, is just put in the good habits, put in some principles and execute on those things. It doesn't have to take forever for you to change your life, whether that's financially, from a leadership perspective, from a spiritual perspective. It doesn't have to take forever. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. Like you said, the get rich quick or instant transformation is not a thing, but you can really change your life pretty quickly if you identify areas of opportunity, things that you want to implement from habits and principles, and you just take action, right? I think we need, like you and I and others in this generation need to show what it's like, and we hopefully we are doing that, what it's like to just identify things and take action, right? Have a positive attitude, trust the Lord, and take action, right? And show other people what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I mean, you couldn't have said it better, Kyle. I mean, we get caught up on the extremes, like you said, right? Success, or I'm at rock bottom, right? But really, the process, we ignore the process in the middle, right? That and the process is never fun. That's where habits are developed. Right. That's where things happen. And, with every tough season of life, you can either become bitter or better. Right. But the choice is yours, right? You can become bitter, or you can decide I'm just going to get better and better. And the way I look at it is, for me personally, whenever anybody says this one conference will change your life, this one book will change your life, this one investment, right? Whenever anybody says something like that, with the exception of Jesus, right? Jesus is the one where you can actually make that statement. This one person can change your life. But
that's right.
For anything else, if there's a do this, buy this, attend this, and your life has changed, I'm not going to do it, because I don't believe that, right? When I started doing like I told you, the leadership conferences, the book, you heard when I would say it, it would be plural: conferences, books, speakers, podcasts, right? All of them had plural, plural behind it. Why? Because it wasn't just one thing, right? It wasn't just one book or one conference or one this. It was a collective of things. So yeah, we've got to embrace the process and the habits. It's not fun, right? But I think that's where we as leaders have to draw out of, I'm not going to be caught up with emotions. I'm not going to be caught up with what I feel or what I see. I'm going to continue to grow. We live in a culture that is very sense oriented. So how do you make me feel? When looking at this next generation in the workforce, right? We study them, and you look at them. One of the things that make them tick is, do I feel valued, right? And that's a huge principle of leadership, right? 100% huge principles of leadership. We've got to make our people feel valued. But I would almost challenge that and flip the tables and say, okay, what if you don't feel valued? Do you just throw in the towel, or do you try to make it better tomorrow, right? Obviously, as leaders, yes, our job is to make other people feel valued. But in the event you don't feel valued, do you continue to serve? Do you continue to lead where you're at, or do you throw in the towel? Because leadership is not synonymous with a title. I know plenty of people that have the title chief, fill in the blank, VP of, fill in the blank. They're not leaders, right? And I know plenty of people that are, John Doe, courtesy clerk at Target, right? Or Jane Doe, waitress at the restaurant down the road, right? And they are leaders, right? So leaders aren't synonymous with position, right? Or title. It's synonymous with your ability to influence other people, right? Because if the definition of leadership is the ability to influence other people, right? Or that's what John Maxwell says, I'd add to it, the ability to influence other people towards a desired result, right? If you can do that, well, then you're a leader. It may look a little bit different for everybody, but you're a leader at the end of the day.
That's the truth. One thing we talk about at Leader, that's interesting, our company's name is Leader, but right, everyone is a leader, whether or not you're the leader.
Yeah.
Right. Without title, you can still lead, right? Like, and you mentioned earlier, in your family, in your community, in your church, wherever you're at, like, you can lead. Everyone has the ability to lead. Right. Some may have more natural giftings than others. That's totally. We all have different giftings. LeBron has different giftings. Right.
Sure.
But we all have the ability to lead ourselves and the people around us. And so it excites me. That's why I love talking to you, is because you fire me up, because I'm like, there are other people out there that believe that we can show other people how to be a leader right where you're at. Right. Like it's like that, it's kind of like Paul, right? Where Paul talks about, right, like, right, like, be like me as I be like Christ, right? Like, watch what I'm doing. I'm not perfect, but like, watch this as I do this. And I think that's just, somebody said that to me yesterday about something, and it just struck me of like, that's what I want to be. And I think that's what you want to be too. Is like, hey, I'm not perfect, but like hopefully you can look at me and see what I'm doing and see who I'm following and how I'm going about it and try to replicate that the best you can. That's impact to me, right? Like when
Right.
people at the end of the day, like you mentioned, people reach out to you and go, hey, my marriage is different because of things that you help me see. My
Yep.
finances are better. I'm like, that's the impact that we can make as believers and as leaders, right?
That's it, man. That is exactly right. And when we as leaders begin to kind of hold our head up high, right? And we begin to embrace the fact that we are going to be countercultural. If you're a
Mhm.
leader,
Talk about
you're
it.
going to be countercultural. You've got to embrace that fact. You're not
Yeah.
going to be one of the masses, right? You're going to be somebody that does things a little bit differently, right?
Yep.
For example, if you look at the life of Jesus, he was a countercultural leader. He acknowledged
100%.
women when you weren't supposed to acknowledge women, right?
Mhm.
Let that sink in for a minute. He was acknowledging women in a culture that said, you don't talk to women, you don't acknowledge women, right?
Mhm.
And so when recently, on that kind of parallel in that, when in recent years we had all the Me Too stuff come out, right, from years
Mhm.
ago, and everybody was shocked, right? These people 20, 30 years ago were harassing people, harassing women, I should say. And we were all shocked that something like this could come out. And what was going on back then, that was just, and the common thing you heard, well, that was just the days back then that we lived in. No, that was a leadership problem,
Yep,
right?
100%.
Because you go look at Jesus and he was countercultural. So when
Mhm.
we embrace the fact as a leader, I don't have to go and do what everybody else is doing. Just because everybody else is doing something doesn't mean I'm running to it. Just because they have an opinion as such doesn't mean I'm approaching that opinion or validating that opinion. When we embrace that fact, that's when we really can change. Because when we look around us and we see people and you look at people, and there's two lenses you should be looking through. Obviously, the lens of love, right? That should be the first one.
Mhm.
Looking at people
100%.
is through love. But as a leader, you're constantly thinking, who can I learn from, etc. And when I see people that are in seasons of life that are doing things that maybe it's not something I want to pursue, maybe it's not something that I don't like that habit that maybe they have, or I don't like the results they're seeing in their life, I'm certainly not going to follow them, right?
Mhm.
Because then I'm asking for those same results. I'm asking for, how they arrived to where they arrived. So I say all that to say we've got to be countercultural, but we've also
Mhm.
got to be cognizant of, if I imitate the masses, guess what? My life is going to be reflective of the masses. So at the
Mhm.
end of my life, when I look back at my life and I have a bunch of unfulfilled dreams and I view my life as not finished, not complete, you can chalk that up to, well, I chose to follow the masses and be one of the
Mhm.
for my entire life.
That's huge. And this is a good place to start to land the plane, but right, who are you imitating, right? Is probably a good question. For myself, right? At times I realize that I'm imitating, successful people in the world, right? And I have to bring it back and have to have a circle around me that's like, hey, I don't know if that's it. That's huge. I love that you said that, right? Like, who are you imitating and who are you becoming, right? We talk about this a lot of like, you need to focus not on just what you're doing, but who you're becoming, right?
Yep.
Because it's so important the person that you're becoming. And a lot of times what you're doing is shaping the person that you are becoming. Can let me ask you this before I want to honor your time. So I know we have like no more time, but before we hop off, if someone's listening or watching and somebody's like, hey, I'm just lost, right? I want all these things out of life. I don't even know where to start or what to do. I know you mentioned podcasts and books and such, but like what's kind of like a practical first thing that they can do? Do they take an inventory of things? Like what would you suggest as you help develop other leaders around you?
Absolutely. That's a great question. If you'll give me 30 seconds before I answer that question, there's one
Yeah,
thing I just wanted to reemphasize that you just said.
come on.
So you were talking about imitating people as as they have habits you want to follow me as I follow Christ, as Paul said. Paul also talked about, I've become all things to all people, right? In
Mm,
other words, he didn't say I became everything to everyone. There's a
mm,
huge difference between being
mm,
all things to all people and everything to everyone. All things to all people says, as a leader, I'm going to find your need and I'm going to attempt to fulfill it, right? Providing it
mm,
lines up with my ethos, my core values. I'm going to attempt to serve you well and help you achieve your dreams. That's all things to all people. Everything to everyone is where you have no core self and you're constantly changing faces dependent upon who you're around.
mm.
So be all things to all people, not everything to everyone. And I'm okay
That's
with that
huge.
as a leader, not being everything to everyone. So having said that, your question, what would you do, with somebody, what would you say to somebody that says, hey, like, from here on out, I want to change my life. I don't like where I'm at. Here's what I would do. You mentioned a personal inventory. I would 100% grab a day, like a Saturday or something, find a remote place you can go to, like get off your phone, let your family members, of course, know where you're going, get off the phone and just spend a day, whether it's at a, hotel in your area, whether it's just going to the park, whatever, spend a day really looking at your life, right? And just doing an inventory. Where's my finances? Where's my physical health? Where's my spiritual health, my emotional health, my mental health? Where's my career, et cetera? Where am I at? And then decide, okay, now where do I want to go? Right. And begin to write down, where do you want to go? After you determine where you're at and where do you want to go, then you start thinking critically, what is one or two things for each category? So it's just like a life plan for each category. What are one or two things that I can practically do to take steps towards that goal? Doesn't mean I'm going to hit that goal by the end of the year, but it does mean I'm going to make progress towards that goal. So I would say that's the first thing. And then the second biggest thing for me that has influenced my life, in addition to my faith, of course, is keeping a positive attitude. Always looking at life through the realm of possibility, right? Opportunities are always knocking. There's no guarantee that with an opportunity, it'll knock a second time, but they're always out there. They're always knocking. And so I would say when there's a setback, right, it's really a setup, right? If you decide to perceive it that way. And I would say keep a positive attitude, because if you do that, you'll be like Teflon, right? They won't be able to keep you down. You'll be hit, you'll be knocked, you'll be punched around in life. But guess what? You're going to get up every time, and each time you're going to get stronger, right? So attitude is so important and critical. So those are the two things that I would do.
I love it. Bro, you need to get in some public speaking gigs, if I may.
Oh man, I like to talk. I mean, you do, I do know I like to run my mouth. So,
Yeah, but you got a lot of wisdom, man.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for doing this. This was really encouraging, and hopefully this is really helpful for some people. I think it will be. I appreciate you, man. You're an inspiration, truly.
Well, Kyle, it was a joy to be here. Thank you for having me, and I hope it'll bless somebody. But thank you for what you do, right? I mean, guys, if you're listening to this podcast, you haven't checked out Kyle's LinkedIn post, you need to go do it. Go check out his profile. Go check out his post. I mean, I see him all the time, and I'm like, man, these are some thought-provoking posts. So, man, keep making impact in your day-to-day. I know you will, and people are going to be better because of it. I being one of those people.
I appreciate it, man. You're a legend. Josh Hitchcock, ladies and gentlemen, go find him on LinkedIn as well. My friend, we'll talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you soon. Thanks, man.
See you, brother.